All right, welcome to Politics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking to you today. Although it's a rough day for me, I got to tell you, it was a tough weekend. Ethan, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I think I'm like a lot of people. There's so much going on that it's unsettling. It's incredibly unsettling. It's incredible. Every time I think we're live through a generational crisis, then we go through another generational crisis.
Absolutely. You know what? I posted. Trump keeps doing the worst thing he's ever done. It just keeps getting worse. And
Yeah.
I'll confess, people used to criticize me and attack me when I said I can't vote for Harris, and I always push back. But I kind of understand where they were coming from now, because she's bad.
Mhm.
I don't think she's this bad.
Mm-mm. No, it's sometimes it's as the expression goes, the devil you know versus the devil you don't, and I think some people thought, oh, well, we knew Trump, he's a known entity, he's a known quantity, knowing what we're going to get with him. I think we were sorely mistaken. Even though Project 2025 laid out a whole roadmap, I still think we are getting surprised by things. I don't think anyone saw this one coming.
Well, he did campaign with a tiny bit of, I think, legitimacy as a less warlike, a less
Mhm.
bellicose president than we've seen in recent years. There was some effort not to, I think, provoke Russia, for which he received a lot of attacks, a lot of criticism, and
Mhm.
I think his motives are far from pure ever.
Yeah.
But hey, I welcome not going to war with Russia.
Yeah,
But
I mean, it was a great positioning that the GOP did in positioning the Democrats as, the party of war, the party of aggression, the party of, hostile foreign policy tactics. And they positioned themselves as, the peace party. It's all a lie, as we've seen, but it was a great marketing pitch that sure managed to seem like convince some voters.
yeah, I mean, my justification ultimately for not voting for Harris wasn't the argument, well, they're both equally bad. I've heard that. It wasn't to send a message to the Democratic Party. It was, I just can't vote for her. Her record is such that I would not feel comfortable, and not just record, but rhetoric, the insistence that she would do nothing different than Biden, the constant support for the Israeli genocide. There's just no other way to look at it. She
Yeah.
never once that I can remember during the campaign actually criticized Israel's actions. She did lament the loss of life, although she never specified which lives were, she was particularly lamenting. So I
Yeah.
don't beat myself up for this, but I'm more accepting now of those who took the position, hey, you just can't vote for anyone but Harris. We have to defeat Trump in
Yeah.
this moment.
And I was one of the I voted for her, and I was I don't it, there was many reasons I thought I had sharp contrast with her on many stances, and it seems like they're coming out now and saying, well, this was a problem. Well, obviously it was an issue, that the stance that you do. I think what's concerning to me, especially right now, is that the DNC's refusal to release the postmortem of the election, and so we can better understand, because I think it's important. I think they're banking on this blue wave that's coming through in resistance to Trump, but we also have to learn from the past and learn what went wrong. I think it's easy to pick the low hanging fruit of her stance on Gaza and Israel as problematic, because they absolutely were problematic positions, but there's more to it. And transparency and accountability matters in politics, and I think the Democratic Party should be leading in that front. And they're not. And as a registered Democrat, someone who's running on the Democratic ticket, that's very troubling to me, that they're not offering more explanations, more insights as to what went on. We have to confront our failures, and I'm just disappointed to see that they're not willing to do that.
Ethan Wechtaluk joining us today on Politics. It is a Monday, the second day of March. And I asked Ethan, I wouldn't say it was super short notice, but somewhat short notice, because I wanted you to respond directly to this attack on Iran, this war on Iran, and how you think, and specifically how you would respond if you were in Congress. You're running for Congress. I want to center that. I want to honor that, because I've been saying over and over that I want some kind of democratic, not with a big D, small d, democratic way to have a better government, that we can elect better leaders. So what do you think? What would you do? What should the Democrats do?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, that out of the gate, Congress has the ability to declare war. There's a gross misinterpretation of the war powers as defined under the Constitution and subsequent pieces of legislation. So that ability rests with Congress. And, we have, I don't think a lot of people realize this, we've never formally declared war since World War II. Think about all the armed conflicts that we've been in that time, and none of them were formal declarations of war. There's authorizations for use of military force, right? There, you can mince it, but that ability rests with Congress, and there's too many blockades right now and I don't think enough Democrats are speaking up. I mean, they are speaking up, but not firmly and strongly enough to sit there and say that this is our ability, and to rein that in, to control that. Seems like it only happens when these crises come up, and when we use military force. That doesn't come up when it should have. That this is, and everyone I think remembers, this is not our first military action in Iran. We bombed them before. So the fact that we are now just debating this, and I know that people were worried when the buildup of military force that indicated that something was imminent, they were trying to have the conversation, but we didn't take action, last year when we unleashed a barrage of missiles and bombs over them. So it's the continual kicking the can down the road that I think frustrates me. And Trump is not going to respond to talk, and we have to rein him in. And like the statement you got on the screen, that the Constitution's is just blatantly clear on this. And when we have an executive who is willing to circumvent the Constitution and act with recklessness, it's not positioning us globally as a leader. It's not positioning, and it's, as we've seen, 4 American lives have been lost already, and for a conflict that was only 1 in 4 Americans support. So 75% roughly of the country is not in favor of this, and we're putting innocent American lives in harm's way. Not to mention innocent civilians. The strike. On the school.
Over 100 girls were killed. Yeah. By almost certainly a strike by Israel. The New York Times, in its characteristic failure to really tell you the news that you should need to know, says nobody's quite sure where the strike came from. Well, it almost certainly came from Israel. Israel does not deny it. Never has. I went through that article closely. They don't deny that they launched the missile that hit that girls' school. And the U.S. is adamant that we did not. It would seem much more likely that it came from Israel. I think there was some crank on the internet who insisted that it was a friendly fire by Iran, but even the U.S. government isn't claiming that.
I mean, the issue, if we want to distill this down, we're doing this because we're trying, for a variety of reasons. I mean, Iran is a state sponsor of terror. The Iranian government, not the people, but the government is the state sponsor of terror, and it's well known and well established. What's contested and what's debated is their nuclear intentions, right? And that's been under contention and debate for a long time, right? And what are they trying to accomplish? What do they actually have, right? So there's a bit of an unknown there, and but we're going in there lawlessly. We're committing war crimes. So we are acting as this global force for good to stop bad people. But are we really the global force for good when we ourselves are committing war crimes? We are partnering with other countries.
Our ally in the war is committing crimes that are dwarf anything that Iran is accused of. Yeah. And to the extent that we really are acting as Trump claims, and I want your feed. I'm just giving you my take. I mean, this is my view. By the way, if you want to join us, 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. If you have any questions, comments for Ethan. So I mentioned that Israel, I think, as our ally. I mean, whatever moral authority we might legitimately claim, and there ain't much, there's maybe that much, is lost when we have Israel as our primary ally and promoting this war. I mean, that
You're
just
nicer
seems
than I am
kind of clear.
with this, Hal. I wouldn't claim we have any moral authority in this situation right now. And as the Pentagon has actually already established, reported by Reuters, we attacked first. It's an indefensible position from the American side. We attacked first. It was an unprovoked attack on a sovereign nation, regardless of what you want to hem and haw over their behavior. And I don't condone the terrorism and acts of the Iranian government. I don't. I also don't condone the terrorism and acts of the Israeli government, who is our strategic partner in this.
I would even throw an American cutting you off for just a second. And I just, one other point, to the extent that there are legitimate concerns, obviously, about the behavior of the Iranian government, and the people there have been in the streets, and there's been a lot of protests. I'm not sure how much of that is organic, and perhaps some of it or a lot of it is through CIA and Israeli manipulation. But regardless, what we just did is we united the Iranian people behind their leaders. We unite them in hatred against us.
Yeah. I mean, the Ayatollah is gone, and we can celebrate that he's an awful man and has perpetrated, despicable horrors upon their country. But we have created a vacuum. And like you were saying, we've created a vacuum in which now there's a collective hate for the United States. And what is that vacuum? What is the end result going to be? Is incredibly dangerous. And I think this is what the United States has done. We have a great history of this. And I use that heavily sarcasm dripping there. But we have a great history of going into countries, taking out leaders, and then creating a vacuum in which look at Afghanistan. I mean, the Taliban's back in control. Well, all of the massive amounts of money and, American lives that were lost in Afghanistan, and for what? The Taliban's back in control. So what is our end game here? And I think that speaks to, the issue. And this is why the power should rest with Congress, to debate these things, to understand these, to learn the intelligence. Because it's war without a clear end game is disastrous. And that takes us back to, again, what we went through with Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's not just what we're trying to accomplish. It's not enough to have an altruistic motive of we're trying to stop the nuclear development, or we're trying to stop their state sponsor of terrorism, right? That's great. I think that's, understood. But how do we do that? And when do we stop? Where's the line when we sit there and say, okay, we're done. We leave, we're gone. And that's not clear in anything that's been discussed. And again, I go back to, that's why I just rest with Congress. Congress is a body, 535 members across both houses to debate these exact issues, to understand it, to make those decisions, to authorize it, and then to serve as that check and that accountable party on the executive, on the military. So when enough is enough, we come home.
We have CP. Let me just jump in, Ethan. We have CPND in the chat who liked your statement that you issued. I like it too, and I want to just comment on that. Because what I really appreciate about that statement, I'll put it back up, is that you don't mince words. You start right out. This is an unauthorized action. It's unconstitutional. You mentioned that as well. I mean, you make the point, and I think it's really relevant in this moment that we point out how different your statement is from the incumbent in the race that you're running in, right, for CD6, Congressional District 6, and your opponent, the incumbent. There's two. There's April McClain Delaney, the current incumbent, and then her predecessor in that office, David Trone, both very, very wealthy people. And of course, now that I want to get that, here we go. I had so much trouble. I can't believe it. So many. I don't even know that many slides, but I couldn't find it. But here we go. So here's what McClain Delaney writes, and it's not terrible, I have to say. But her first focus is what we see over and over. The New York Times does this too, how bad Iran is. But that's not that's not the question. The question is, did the president act lawlessly? That's what we have to. We're Americans. That's what we have to worry about first and foremost. Is he violating the Constitution? And I don't know why. Why do you think so many Democrats? We saw this, and you mentioned the. And I'm going off in different tangents, but I wanted to bring in, because you mentioned it, the postmortem, the DNC's postmortem, which by all accounts now concluded that Harris may well have certainly lost a lot of support, because she wouldn't condemn Israel. She wouldn't break with Israel, even in the least way. She always had to preface her remarks with how bad Hamas is, and that backfired terribly. And I think this will backfire too, when Democrats first and foremost start off with how bad Iran is.
I think
why do they do that?
It's an interesting point to sit there as a Democrat and say, well, Iran shouldn't have nuclear weapons. Well, look who has their finger on the trigger of the United States nuclear arsenal. We shouldn't have nuclear weapons. No one should have nuclear weapons, right? None of us should. No country on this planet needs nuclear weapons. There's no rational argument in my mind for a weapon of mass destruction and of that magnitude, right? And you know, I've been criticized recently for making a statement in response to calling it a genocide in Gaza, that someone said, you know, this is an exchange over email, because they accused me of being anti-Semitic for my position on Gaza, and said, well, the United States dropped, you know, nuclear bombs on, you know, Hiroshima and Nagasaki and killed 200,000 people. Is that a genocide? My response was that no, that's not a genocide. It's a war crime. We massacred innocent civilians to shorten a war. Now, you know, you can debate the merits of saving lives versus the projected, you know, analysis of what they did. It was a war crime. We murdered innocent civilians by dropping a weapon of mass destruction. We went into Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction. We never found them. So we continue to perpetuate this idea that Iran has nuclear weapons, or they're developing nuclear weapons. I mean, I was back in, you know, high school over 20 years ago. I wrote a report and, you know, in a government class talking about this. They didn't have it at the time. There's no concrete proof of their, you know, and it's still debated. It's still contested how close they actually are. What did they have? So we're going in and doing this to stop something, and the Democrats are beating this drum. They're falling into the same trap. They've learned nothing. And if we need to have conversations about to stop terror or things like this, military action, dropping bombs, you know, it didn't work. We've learned nothing from Iraq and Afghanistan, absolutely nothing. And that's incredibly disappointing to see that diplomacy is murdering people. It's murder. We're committing war crimes. We launched an unprovoked attack on a sovereign nation, and regardless of their role, they are a sovereign nation. We are murdering innocent civilians to perpetuate this idea that their government is awful. And again, we're partnering with Israel, who has their own history of doing this. And it's just, I think the establishment Democrats will regret this position. And I hope people see it, because you're right, that the humanity in what is being said by my opponents is gone. They're immediately pointing the finger in the wrong direction. This is an unprovoked, illegal, unconstitutional act by our government, and that's what we should be doing. That's what we should be calling out, not a sovereign nation.
I do want to get into the limits of democracy and whether the lessons learned or not learned from Iraq are because of some kind of, I don't know, block or stupidity on the people, or it's just the fact that our leadership doesn't care, that they do what is best for them rather than what the American people want. But it just seems so clear to me that what Trump did, unconstitutional. Only Congress has the power to declare war. And even if you look at this War Powers Resolution Act, it's very clear that the president can only exercise the use of his power as the commander-in-chief to get involved in hostilities overseas if either there's a declaration of war, there wasn't, specific statutory authorization, there wasn't, or a national emergency created by attack upon the U.S., there wasn't. Mm-mm. So I would go even further than you. I'm not saying you don't go this far, but I think it's I'd like to see, let me say it this way. I'd like to see Democrats calling for impeachment.
Yeah. I mean, we should keep an impeachable offense counter. We're to know what we're at, and we're over a year into his administration, and I don't know what count we're at. But yeah, I mean, and we've seen repeatedly the Trump administration's exercise of the term national emergency in a variety. I mean, they used the national emergency to try to implement tariffs that the Supreme Court struck down, and we've seen it time and time again. I mean, how many national emergencies do we encounter? And there was no attack by Iran in recent times, and it's just. It's despicable that we're not addressing that core issue. And I am by no means an expert on war powers. But I think as what you put up there, Hal, is very clear. There was no formal declaration of war. There's no statutory authorization. And there's no national emergency created by an attack. 9/11 was a specific scenario in which there was attack on the United States, and they responded. Now, as we've seen and we've learned throughout history, did we go after the right people with that? Was it really the Iraqis and the Afghanis? The Saudis had involvement in sponsoring that, right? So I think it's debatable when we look at some of that. Did we actually go after the right people? But yeah, it's we're missing the mark, and I think it's disappointing to see the Democrats in their approach to this, and I'd really like to see them coalesce behind this idea that the problem is not, in this moment, the problem is not Iran. It's the U.S. government and our unprovoked hostilities.
You make a really good point, and this is something I had spoken with Jack Quirk about, who we had scheduled to join us today. He may still call in. He's a retired attorney, and he has a lot of thoughts. He's written about the War Powers Resolution Act, so I really wanted his feedback. But he can join us, or he can join me later this week, so that's fine if he can't make it today. He made the same point, right? I mean, there's so many different reasons to impeach Trump, but I would make the case this to me is a little bit even more serious. I think maybe the ICE deployment is close to this, or is this, but launching an unprovoked war, and basically at the behest of what I would call a lawless state at this point. Israel's violating and contravening every international law, every law of decency. I think that it's an action. Not only does it stand apart, in my view, from a moral standpoint, I think it's also an impeachment that I would think the American public would respect. Now, I'm not saying that you're not going to necessarily win in Congress. I think politically, you could make a very, very powerful case to the American people. And that would be a smart thing to do if you want to get rid of this guy.
1 in 4, right? 1 in 4 people approve of this, and I think what we're seeing is, again, innocent Iranians are being killed. Innocent Israelis are Israel's being attacked, right? And the Israeli government is not reflective of the Israeli people. So we can heavily criticize the actions of, Netanyahu and the rest of the Israeli government, while recognizing that the vast majority of Israeli citizens are innocent and more than likely do not agree with the actions of their government, right? And so we're seeing this mass casualty and loss of life across the spectrum. And then to see that, Iran and their proxies are attacking throughout the region. They're attempting to destabilize the region. So we've seen attacks across Dubai and Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, right, and other Abu Dhabi, and other places throughout that. So we're seeing what is attempting or threatening to spill over into this massive regional conflict, and I think what is important for the American people to understand in this is the global implications, the geopolitical and the economic implications of this crisis that is emerging, right? So Dubai International Airport is the world's busiest airport. Busiest period in the entire world. It's closed.
I didn't know that. I would have said Heathrow. If you said busiest airport, I would have said Heathrow. But or maybe Atlanta. Isn't Atlanta's really busy, I think.
Yeah, Atlanta Hartsfield is the busiest in the United States, but Dubai International is the busiest in the world. 3,800 flights a day. So that has ripples throughout the world. Just the passenger volume, air cargo volume, right, that ripples throughout the world. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. 20% of the world's oil flows through that strait. So, and then you're seeing, just I saw this morning that, the massive refinery in Saudi Arabia was attacked. So we're looking at threats to Aramco, the Saudi government's, oil conglomerate, right, is under assault too. And then the implications of that. I mean, if the price of oil skyrockets, and we're already seeing it, I haven't seen the latest today, but we're already seeing the price of oil skyrocket, that's going to have massive implications on the cost of gas, right? The cost of heating oil, right? The cost of all sorts of products that are derived from petroleum, areas. We could potentially see the cost of, liquid natural gas skyrocket as too. That's going to have a direct impact on the American consumer. And working families who are already being squeezed by so many factors here are then going to get squeezed even more. I mean, the people who are struggling to pay their bills and with their low income jobs, right? Now they're going to have to they're going to have to pay more at the pump to fill up their car to drive to work, to be underpaid. And that's going to hurt. That's going to hurt us. That's, and it, on one hand, it feels selfish while there are people being bombed who are innocent overseas, but I think Americans need to understand that impact here at home. And it's not just that. I mean, it's the impact on Wall Street, and when corporations are, when they're going to start feeling the heat, and they're going to start responding to that, right? It's
sorry about that. Shipments. I blocked you there for a second.
No.
You were like, what happened to me? Sorry.
No,
but people could hear you. We still heard you.
Good.
We just lost your visual for a second.
Yeah, we're going to see global impacts. Again, air cargo is going to be limited, right? And that's going to affect, the transit of goods, right? And how is that going to spill over, domestic product supply shortages, supply chain issues, right? The cost of goods in your store are going to go up, and you might not see the price impacts immediately like you will at the pump, right? You'll see those impact at the pump in a very short time span. But it's the supply chain will be impacted, and we're going to feel that domestically from this. And then you look at the loss of American soldiers going abroad. Trump said he has ever the golfer. He's not going to have the yips about putting boots on the ground in Ireland. That's way too casual, and it's there are grave concerns for the American economy, the American political system, the American people with this reckless and lawless action, unconstitutional action, and
100%, 100%
concerning.
And I mean, also we've seen Israel now clamping down on Gaza. They've cut off all entry into Gaza from the Egyptian side. They had opened that Rafah gate passage that's closed now. You have just humanitarian crisis there, deaths there, murder there by Israel. It's just awful. We just go on and on. You can see this, the primary school bombing probably by Israel, most certainly by Israel, a grave violation. Close to 1,000 were killed, I think, in Iran as of this morning. We could just, again, go on, and we have to do something. We have a moral imperative. I wish I could answer, could give a thought on what I believe that imperative is. But I would ask you, because you said, Ethan, I want to get back to a point you made about the lessons learned or not learned from Iraq and from Afghanistan, from Libya, right? Yeah. I think the American people kind of learned those lessons. And I this was kind of put this in my mind, that there's a good chance, a good thought, that possibility that Hillary Clinton, for example, did not become president because she supported W's war, right? She supported the W. Cheney war and the people of Iraq. And John Kerry had also voted to authorize the use of force. It made it much harder for him to challenge Bush in 2004 when he was the Democratic nominee. Hillary lost 2 elections to candidates who painted her to the right on war. First, Obama, who had, I believe, voted against the authorization of use of force if he was able to, if he had power. I'm not sure if he did, but he certainly spoke out against it. And Trump did come out early. Now, he didn't at the time in 2003. I don't think he spoke out against it. But I think by 2005, 2006, he was saying this was a mistake. There's clips from Howard Stern, along with him saying that he, his age limit was 12 or something. But he did say, yeah, this hasn't worked out. It took Clinton till 2014. So Democrats paid a very heavy price for supporting that war politically. Americans just didn't want to put them in, those who were war supporters. And it seems as though ultimately our politicians, once they have power, will just reject the public's wish. So does that tell us? So there's a limit on democracy writ large, or on our democracy? Can we elect people who are not going to support war and trust them not to if they take real power?
It's a great question, Hal. And something that when I get attacked in comments.
It's a depressing question, though, isn't it? It's depressing.
Yeah,
but yeah.
I mean, it is. I want to state something for the record, because I get this in comments from Republicans. I condemn Obama's unauthorized use of military force, and I condemn Biden's unauthorized use of military force. So I want to make that clear in the context of this discussions, because we're talking about Trump, we're talking about Bush, we're talking, I condemn Obama's use of military, extensive drone strikes, right? We're going into Libya, right, to overthrow Gaddafi. Yes, Gaddafi is a horrible person. But look at Libya now, right? And look at the power vacuum that led to Benghazi, right? So I condemn that. Biden made extensive use of strikes in Syria and Iraq and Yemen. And again, those were to target, Iranian proxies, right? But they still did extensive military action in sovereign countries unauthorized by Congress. So in the context of all this, to go to your question, this is an executive issue where we do not have adequate checks on the power of the executive when it comes to military action. And is this a failure of, I don't know if this is a failure of democracy writ large. I think this is a failure of the American government, Congress, to limit the authority of the executive. And, when you get into the debate about political science, and you can really kind of nerd out over this, about the expansion of executive power over the years, and where does it kind of originate? Some people will take it back to FDR, right? That's kind of the first. And was his expansion of American power a legitimate exercise given the Depression and World War II, right? Should it have been reined in after that? And then how do politicians like JFK and Johnson and Nixon and their use of the CIA, right, and military intervention in countries and covert action to destabilize foreign governments. But what we've seen throughout 20th century into the 21st century is a massive expansion of executive power, and Republicans and Democrats alike. And the American people have made it clear over and over again, like you indicated, that they do not condone this, right? That this is an inappropriate use of American resources, is an inappropriate use of our perception as a global force for good when we recklessly bomb people and we play it off as if we're doing the right thing. It's debatable, right? Do we have a moral obligation to intervene and to act? It's not for me to answer, but this is why it should be debated in Congress, right? Like you go back to this time and time again. There is a body of people who can debate this, who are elected by the people, represent the people. In theory, there's a whole conversation about,
you want to be in that body.
I do want to be in that body to have these exact debates.
I would posit that there are times, I'm not a complete opponent of the projection of American force overseas. I would posit there may be times when we have a moral obligation to act, especially, I would say, when we are complicit in the crimes that are being committed. So the perfect example, I would say, is the Israeli genocide. I would say we have an absolute moral obligation to send the U.S. military in to protect Palestinians.
Yeah. I think, where it comes from me, the challenge that I have with some of this is there are global conflicts that are going on across the world, right? And we pick and choose where we want to intervene and where we want to act. And while and rightfully so, Israel and Gaza grabs the headlines, right? And I don't think it grabs enough of the headlines, but it's still grabbing the headlines. Go look at Sudan and what's going on in Sudan. It's horrid what is going on there. And not enough people are talking about that. Where is our moral imperative to go into Sudan and act to liberate the people of Sudan from the genocide that's going on there? It's a genocide that's happening there, and we look at that there's a hard line to draw, because once you intervene in one place, you have to almost. And I will make this conversation that, well, just because you do one thing doesn't mean you have to. But I think when we become that global force for good, when we start saying, well, we have a moral imperative to act, do we have a moral imperative to act against the humanitarian abuses in China? Do we have a moral imperative to act against humanitarian abuses in Pakistan? Do we have them? I mean, we've never gone into North Korea. Do we have a moral imperative to go in and liberate the North Korean people right now from what's going on? Where do we draw the line in that? We overthrew Maduro. We left his government effectively in power. Who knows what's going to happen next in Venezuela? We have no end game there. We have no end game in Iran. That's being shared, at least. We have no end game in Gaza. Ukraine is still in conflict with Russia. Do we have a moral imperative to help them? And then I think, again, I'm one person, we're having this conversation, but the U.S. government, the military, the executive, branch has an obligation to share the information that they have. Why have they decided to act in Iran and not Sudan? What intelligence might there be in Sudan that says, hey, this is not a good idea? But we need to have that conversation, and we're not. And at least as the American people know, we're not having those conversations. There needs to be that level of transparency with Congress. And that's part of why I'm running. I'm not going to shy away from that conversation. And, when elected, if I get there, I'm going to force the conversation. Why aren't we talking about Sudan? Why aren't we talking about the human rights abuses in China? Why are we not pressing China to do that? Why are we not pressing? There's issues globally, and
right.
We have to draw.
Well, I mean, these are critically important. But we've got Ethan Wechtaluk with us. And he is running for Congress in the 6th District. And, you can learn much more about him, Ethan, from MD.com. I wanted him to weigh in on what Trump is doing with respect to Iran, with Israel, the attacks, because he is running for Congress, and I want to see some pro-peace Democrats in office, and Ethan fits that bill. So we're talking about that, this issue with him. Now, Ethan, I want to get to some other races, actually, because you're not your race is until June is the primary, but there's actually a couple of big states tomorrow. But before we leave this issue of projecting peace as opposed to war around the world, I just want to throw the United Nations into this. Trump has really sidelined that body. And certainly we can point to many areas where it hasn't been as effective or as has failed to prevent war. But do you think that we that he left it too soon, that we've given up on an institution that actually would have a lot of moral authority and the ability to perhaps protect people around the world, including in Sudan, including possibly even in some of those other countries you mentioned, China, South Korea, North Korea? I understand that's tougher, but your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, these organizations like the United Nations, and there's other groups that have similar functions, the World Health Organization and to name another, have a strategic role in the global society. And I think the United States, if we're going to claim this moral superiority to act, we need to ensure that we are engaged effectively with these organizations to ensure that there is a mutual understanding of the objectives. But I think it goes back to the issue, if we are at home not certain what's going on, then it's clear that we're not going to be able to rationalize and justify it to the United Nations. And I think the ultimate, yes, we should be involved in the United Nations, we should be involved in NATO, we should be involved in the World Health Organization. But a lot of this starts domestically. And one thing that someone had raised to me, and it was a valid criticism to a statement that I had posted online was that while they appreciated my comments on Iran, Maryland is facing its own challenges, and with the looming threat of ICE, and so we're talking about our moral superiority and a global force for good and promoting peace around the world, but we are failing domestically to do that. And there's a line in political science that the best foreign policy is a strong domestic policy. And, or you can distill it down to even a lower level. When you get on an airplane and they do the safety briefing, you put on your mask before you help others. Our mask isn't on. And I think in some sense, before we start intervening in countries abroad to correct their moral failings, we need to work on correcting our own moral failings here at home. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. The ICE.
And to your credit, you've been very critical of ICE, the thugs that are rounding up, people who live in the country. Some of them don't know any country but the United States. Some are U.S. citizens. The majority, I think the great majority, have not even been charged with any crime. They weren't even wanted before they were arrested by ICE.
Yeah.
You have been a moral voice crying out against this. My question, but you also have faced your own challenges and been you received threats, is that right? Because of this. Tell us about that.
Yeah, politics is an incredibly polarizing environment lately. I don't know how far we go back to when the polarization really started, but yeah, over the last several weeks, especially as I've gained some more prominence and more attention and visibility in this race, I've received a number of threats. And it's hard to know what to take credibly and what to dismiss. But the mere idea that threatening violence against an individual for their political views or their personal views is unacceptable. And we can't condone this, regardless of their position. You go back to the horrible murder of Charlie Kirk. I vehemently disagree with Charlie Kirk and so much of what he stood for. His death was an abomination. And when I receive messages, whether it's comments left on posts or DMs threatening to murder me, or one I received yesterday threatening to behead me, and then the individual proceeded to name one of my children in a post and degraded them, that is a serious concern. And
very terrifying.
It's terrifying. And I get asked all the time when I talk about this, well, do you report them to the police? I do report some. Other ones, it's the unfortunate reality is my recourse right now is to take out a restraining order. So if every person who threatened me, I took out a restraining order against them, I would be spending a lot of time in court. And what does it accomplish? And it's just a sad commentary on where we're at right now, that discourse has failed, and such that when you disagree with someone, your immediate response is to threaten violence against them and their family. And it's not going to dissuade me from running. It's not going to stop me from standing up for what I believe in, whether that's people in our communities who are being assaulted by ICE or the lawless actions of the administration abroad. I'm not going to let that silence me, but it is concerning the death threats and threats. Some of them are just outright, you should die. Others are, you should be beat up. You should be, and I've been called in every name in the book, and it's despicable. And I condone these behaviors on both sides. There are plenty of Republicans who receive similar threats from Democrats. It's a bipartisan issue, but I think as a society, we just have to address this behavior, because there's no place in this.
Well, of course. I mean, and these types of threats, I think, probably should be they should be illegal, and I think they are, right? I mean, you can't publicly threaten violence against someone. I know there's freedom of speech, but
yeah, the issue is candidates are treated differently than elected officials. If I was an elected official, a credible threat of violence against me would be handled differently than as a candidate, a threat of violence against me. When I talked to the police yesterday, and I want to be clear, I'm not throwing the Montgomery County Police under the bus. They're following a playbook, and whether I think their playbook is out of date and needs to be revised. They were very nice, very polite, very friendly. But their position is there's nothing we can do. If he shows up at your house, you have the right to defend yourself. Maryland is a castle doctrine state, whether that's adequate or not. So if he shows up, individual shows up at my house, I do have the right to defend myself and protect myself. But the fact that my only recourse is to go to court, get a temporary restraining order, then petition for a full restraining order, then it will be served to this individual. Who knows how long that will take, how much that will cost. That's my and that's my only recourse to this.
Well, you made a good point, which was, what good does it do? I think that's a fair question, because some people will be triggered. They'll be like, I'm going after, because of that, they're going to, it's not like because there's that restraining order, the police are staking out your house and are protecting you 24/7, or the guy or whoever it is has got an ankle bracelet and they know exactly where they are. So, and you really can't do that. But I do think that where you make a threat to hurt somebody online should be treated differently. I understand we have speech, but.
Yeah, I saw an interesting point on this subject when I was referring to Republicans and talked about Mitt Romney as being one of the early Republicans to oppose Trump. And someone made an interesting point that Mitt Romney is one of the wealthiest Republican members of Congress, had the ability and means to afford private security to protect himself from the threats when he opposed Trump. I do not have those means. Now, my opponents do, both Representative McClain Delaney and David Trone have the means to hire private security. They're not drawing the hard line that I am. And so I do, unfortunately, place my safety and well-being at risk when I speak out. And that is, again, a sad indictment of where we are in the political system, but I'm not going to let it silence me. But I said this to people. If you want to attack me, if you want to criticize me for my beliefs and opinions, please go ahead. I'll take it. My family, my wife, my kids, that is horribly and grossly
should be totally off limits, of course.
Yeah.
And I want to say to people who criticize others for their opinions, and I know I'll just say this. I know I've done that many times. I try so hard not to.
Yeah.
I try to only criticize opinions. I try to really only address the specific arguments with logic and facts that I believe are on my side. I'm sure I get lots wrong. I'm human. But but I think we should base our arguments on a hopeful assumption that people are really trying to get to the right answers. Now, we may have different answers, but at least we're trying to get there. Unless the problem is in government now, with this kind of caucustocracy, plutocracy, oligarchy, the interests of the people in power just are so divergent from most Americans.
I will engage in a good faith debate with anyone, regardless of whether we are coming at it from the same background, position, belief, or we are in totally opposite ends of the spectrum. If it is a good faith debate grounded in a mutual respect for each other, I will engage with whomever. And maybe I know there's a lot of Democrats who would not. I'm happy to have that conversation. The minute it crosses over into, claims that are false or name calling or degrading remarks, it ceases to be a good faith debate. It ceases to have mutual respect. And I have received many libelous claims over email and in comments and things like that. And I just, and then they'll leave a comment and then they'll respond, well, you didn't reply, so therefore I must be right. No, I didn't reply because
I love that.
You made a degrading remark about me, or you made a patently false statement. I got one over email that said, well, because you're against, because you believe that it's genocide in Gaza, therefore you think Jews are evil and you're anti-Semitic. And then I didn't reply, and it was like, well, you didn't reply, therefore I must be right. No, I didn't reply because you made a libelous statement about me. I do not believe that. I do not believe that Jews are evil. I am not anti-Semitic. I'm just not going to engage in a debate where someone says that to me.
Well, it's such an absurd, I guess, exaggeration or
Yes.
misstatement of what you were saying.
Yeah.
We only have a few more minutes left. I centered last week. I've been using that word centered a lot. I got to stop doing that. I discussed last week, Thursday, Friday, the Texas primary, which is tomorrow, and more polling coming out there. Very interesting race. There's also a primary in North Carolina tomorrow, and I was taken by one race, which is in the Research Triangle area, which is among the most progressive parts of that state. The incumbent is named Valerie Fouché. She is a Democrat. She's African American. She defeated Nida Alam, who is a Muslim, who is one of the most progressive people running for office. 4 years ago, Alam lost to Fouché. Now they're having a rematch. Apparently, the district has become more to the left. Alam is saying that Democratic challengers Alam is saying that Fouché hasn't fought hard enough against Trump. And I guess my question to you is, I don't know how familiar, if at all, you are with this race, but I assume you endorse that, but what is your view? How do you see fighting? What does fighting mean? Does it mean giving a lot of statements and press conferences like Jasmine Crockett has done? Or do you see either additional ways or more effective ways to take on the Trump administration?
Yeah, first off, I have been watching this race. Nida Alam, I am a fan of, and I sincerely hope that she wins. Yes, the Democrats are not doing enough to fight and stall. I was interviewed recently where I was talking about what's going on in Maryland with the redistricting effort and how State Senator Bill Ferguson has obstructed it and held up the process. And I refer to him as the Mitch McConnell of Maryland politics. And for those who might not get that reference, how much Mitch McConnell obstructed the Obama administration as the minority party. Right? Merrick Garland, if people are paying attention, is not on the Supreme Court, despite having been nominated to be the Supreme Court. Now, maybe we dodged a bullet there. Maybe Mitch McConnell helped us, considering Merrick's role as AGs, right? But the idea that the minority party can't do anything but politically posture and put out performative statements is it's ridiculous. And there are ways to filibuster. There are ways to break quorum. There's all sorts of processes and procedures that the Democrats are not reaching into that bag to pull out and then obstruct. And I think we have to stop claiming this moral high road that we have this sense of superiority, and we need to play by the rules. And if we just play by the rules hard enough, that we'll stop him. It's not working. It's not working. And so I think we have to start thinking outside the box. And I agree with Alam that I don't think incumbent Democrats, even ones who claim that they're moderate, and even ones who claim that they're progressive. Both my opponents in this race claim that they are progressives. They're not. I will say that they're not progressives. They're just not. They're and so we have to do more. And if incumbents are not willing to fight, if they're not willing to do more than write an angry letter to Kristi Noem every time ICE does something, thinking that Kristi Noem's going to write them back, then get out of the way. We are. This is a millennial reference. Yeah, how I'm going to make a millennial joke.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Here. In my house, we're big fans of the movie Space Jam. We grew up with that. I grew up with that movie. My kids love that movie. And there's a line from Daffy Duck in that movie. And my wife is watching. She'll appreciate this. Where Daffy Duck says, "Just get out of my way." And that is, in some sense, my mantra to this, that if the establishment does not want to rise to the occasion, just get out of my way. And I say that for me, and I say that for people like Alam and others around the country who are willing to step up to the plate and fight and reach into that toolbox. Just get out of their way and let them do it.
Well, and I looked through this article pretty closely because I wasn't very familiar or at all familiar with Fouché, and I'd heard of Alam, but not much. And one thing I found, this was a good article by CNN. They really separated the two candidates. Fouché is not the worst by any means. I mean, there's a lot of Democrats who are far more corporatist and corrupt than she is, but she still plays that trying to, throw the fastball right down the middle rather than, represent the interests of her constituents. So you can see here the challenger call, and I know this is an issue that's dear to your heart, right? A moratorium on data centers. That's what we need. And, Fouché says, well, I don't like it, but it's up to the people to decide. And of course, we know these local boards are so often paid off, and there's all sorts of favors that are done that where these construction boondoggles are approved despite the wishes of the district. So that's just one example. She wants to defund ICE's ability to detain or monitor immigrants. I'm not sure what that means. I mean, that's ICE's job, isn't it? Isn't what ICE does is they go out and they arrest people. So either you defund the agency or you don't. So you can see she's really trying to have her cake and eat it too. And I think Alam is stronger here. So I would agree. I would support her very much. I think what's even more important, and again, Fouché says no offensive weapons to Israel, and she does. She is a sponsor of the Block the Bombs Act, but that's about as far as you can go in Congress, apparently. If you're a Democrat, you can't just say no support for Israel, although Alam does. But this is what I really want to throw in there. Fouché takes outside money. Now, she's rejected some in this. She says she won't take AIPAC money. She's taken it in the past. She's taken crypto money, which does throw into relief her refusal to support a ban on data centers. So I think this is where voters really have to be sophisticated and say, okay, she's saying some good things. She's sponsored some bills I like, but ultimately, is she going to be a game changer? Is she going to say no more money from corrupt
to bring
groups?
It to a CD6 issue, right? Congresswoman Delaney posted the other day a post of her at a Walmart pharmacy processing facility in the district. Now, this is great that it creates some jobs, sure. Walmart is a corporation that has devastating impacts on small business. So when you release an affordability agenda that talks about boosting our communities and investing in small businesses, and then you go on a press tour where you stand with Walmart, the corporation that is the literal personification of destruction of small businesses in America, where do your interests lie? Does it lie with small businesses or does it lie with mega corporations? And she's taken money from Walmart. They are a contributor to her campaign. So, when you see statements like Fouché where she's, saying that, and then, like, again, she took money from Anthropic. Right. So, and again, bring in a CD6 issue. In Frederick County, when they voted on the data centers in Frederick County, the Democrats were the ones in favor, but the Republicans were the ones who opposed to it. And this where it goes to the thing is I'm aligning, and so many Democrats in Frederick County are aligning with the Republican members of the county council as allies to fight the data centers, not the establishment Democrats. That should tell you something.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to call it a program, but I do want to, based on what you were just saying about Republicans not always being worse and sometimes actually being better than some Democrats anyway, often many Democrats, I think is really relevant because one of the things I've really tried very hard not to do is to demonize people that I don't agree with on some issues because I may want to work with them on others. And also because I don't see a clear-cut moral divide where Democrats are in one Venn diagram that's morally superior to Republicans. I just don't see it. And this is a perfect example. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene saying what it's the truth. We are not, it appears, a nation divided by left and right, but by those who want to fight wars for Israel and those who want peace and to be able to afford their bills and health insurance. You could have written that yourself, Ethan.
Yeah. I mean,
kind of said that already.
You cited the Texas race between Crockett and Tallarico, James Tallarico, and I don't 100% agree with what he said. This is not about left versus right. This is about top versus bottom. Right. Yeah. And I think that's what Marjorie is getting at here. Right. It's not just about a left right. Now, again, I don't want to get into this because I'm not going to run and embrace everyone on the right. There's plenty of people on the right who I have massive disagreements and I will never embrace. Someone like Randy Fine from Florida. Right. But there are select issues that I think is possible to unite to fight. And if that means in Frederick County that I have to work with Republicans to fight data centers, I will do it. I will work with them because it is a key issue that people can agree on. And if corporate sellouts in the Democratic Party or in the Republican Party want to betray the American people, they deserve to be called out. They deserve to be criticized. And it's unfortunate that they think that they are okay to do this. We have to stop this corporate influence that destroys our communities. And we're seeing it too often in too many ways.
Yep. 100%. And just on that same note, I did want to juxtapose, you're talking about Democrats who are taking money from big tech and you're going to fight against them. And if your ally is a Republican who isn't, even though you may totally disagree on programs that help the poor and, healthcare issues, Medicare for all, fracking, what have you. But if it's to keep those data centers out that are so devastating for the environment and cost a lot, ultimately will jack up energy costs for poor, struggling, working class Marylanders, you're there. And I just want to compare again what Taylor Greene said to Jake Auchincloss, who is I guess, sort of considered a rising Democratic star and a huge Zionist. And here he just immediately goes right to Israel and the poor Israelis. They're in this fight for justice and freedom, completely ignoring the loss of life in Iran, completely ignoring that Israel is not is a terrible actor. And trying to use sentiment to get us to do something that is bad for us, bad for the world.
Yeah. Where do their allegiance lie? And it's become abundantly clear that it's not with the American people. And I will call out and root out that corruption regardless of whether it's a Democrat or Republican and independent. It doesn't matter. Your allegiance, your loyalty, your pledge as a public servant, as a member of Congress, and as a member of the United States government is to the American people, not to corporations, not to billionaires, not to foreign interests, not to foreign countries. It's to the American people. And so when you see things like this, I will condemn it swiftly, Democrat, Republicans alike. This is not what our members of Congress should be lobbying for.
Ethan, really thank you again for coming. Always a great conversation. You're the type of Democrat I want to see running for office, that I will support, of course. Final word from you. We got your website up there so people can see it, ethanformd.com. Please visit. But any appearance you want to promote or some other, I don't know, something.
I just want to say, a surge of ICE is coming to Maryland, and there's a lot of evidence to support this and a lot of conversations going on. I want to strongly encourage people to engage locally in the communities. Montgomery County Immigrant Rights Collective is an amazing organization that is putting boots on the ground to help people. If you would like to connect with them, you can reach to them directly, MoCo_IRC on Instagram. You can reach out to me and I can help connect you with them. If you're located throughout the state of Maryland, there are other groups, but we need to prepare to help those people in our communities and unite together. And as Marylanders, we can get through this. So I just want to put that message out there.
All right, Ethan, thanks so much for joining us. It's really my honor to have you on, and best of luck going forward in your campaign.
Thank you, Hal. Appreciate it.
All right. And to everyone watching, thank you so much for being part of Politics. I'll be back tomorrow. It will be an Arlen Tuesday. Enjoy your afternoon.